made rich. The book of Revelation talks about a whore who is made rich by the luxuries in which it describes items listed as being sold as the things that are used for the construction of the third temple. This can be found in the following prophecy. In Revelation chapter 18 verse 11 says, "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore." We see that the merchants will no longer be selling these items because their temple is being sacked, and there is a Jewish boycott on purchasing items worldwide as the kings of the earth have sacked Jerusalem, and the nations have found the Jewish Zionist state intolerable, and they no longer will tolerate it, and they start to persecute the Jews worldwide, which is the time of Jacob's trouble. And it continues on. And what are these merchants selling? Revelation chapter 18 verse 12 and 13 says, "The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men." We see these items that are used and listed for the construction and the operation of the temple, in which the woman, Jerusalem, in the book of Ezekiel chapter 16, was also decked in the same things. The Lord decked Jerusalem to be a wife and to be a bride, and he decked her with gold and precious stones and all the things that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. But then she became a harlot in Ezekiel chapter 16. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 13 says, "Thus wast thou decked with gold and silver, and thine raiment was of fine linen and silk, embroidered work, and didst eat fine flour and honey and oil, and thou wast exceeding beautiful, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom." And we see that the Jerusalem has the precious wood being used for the construction of the temple. Exodus chapter 30 verse 1 talks about wood for construction. And it says, "And thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon, of shittim wood shalt thou make it. And Jerusalem is seen with precious stones on the ephod of the high priest." In Exodus chapter 28 verse 17 through 21 it says, "And thou shalt set in the settings of stones, even 4 rows of stones. The first row shall be a sardius, a topaz, a carbuncle. This shall be the first row. And the second row shall be an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. And the third row a ligure, an agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row a beryl, an onyx, a jasper. And they shall be set in gold in their enclosings. And the stones shall be with the names of the children of Israel, 12 according to their names, like the engravings of a signet. Every one with his name shall they be according to the 12 tribes." And so we see the 12 stones, which are the precious stones that she is decked with. And what we see for the incense and the odors is a portion of the cinnamon and all those things that were used are actually for the incense and for the anointing oil. Exodus chapter 30 verse 23 says, "Take thou also unto thee principal spices, and of myrrh of 500 shekels, and of sweet cinnamon half as much, even 250 shekels, and of sweet calamus 250 shekels." Exodus chapter 30 verse 24 says, and of cassia 500 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary, and of olive oil and hin. And the oil is used for the offerings and anointing oil in the temple. Incense and odors and frankincense we see here in Exodus chapter 30 verse 34. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Take unto thee sweet spices, sacte and arnica and galbanum, and these sweet spices with pure frankincense, of each shall there be a like weight." And then we see the curtains of the temple were made with purple and scarlet. Exodus chapter 26 verse 1. "Moreover thou shalt make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen, and blue and purple and scarlet, with cherubims of cunning work shalt thou make them." And we see lavers of brass and of iron we see here. Exodus chapter 30 verse 18 says, "Thou shalt also make a laver of brass, and his foot also of brass to wash withal. And thou shalt put it between the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, and thou shalt put water therein." And David, for the building of the house of God at Jerusalem, gathered a lot of the items. And we see the iron was used for the nails in 1 Chronicles chapter 22. It says, "And David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land of Israel. And he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. And David prepared iron in abundance for the nails, for the doors of the gates, and for the joinings, and brass in abundance without weight. And Solomon had ivory for his throne as well. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. Solomon also had horses and chariots in Jerusalem. So we see here in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 25 and 26. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver, vessels of gold, garments of armor, and spices, horses and mules a rate year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he that had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots with the king at Jerusalem. We also see that the floors of the temple were made of costly marble, which is 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. It says, "And the king commanded that they brought great stones, costly stones, and hewn stones to lay the foundation of the house. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them, and the stone squarers, so they prepared timber and stones to build the house." And we see that Christ also was mentioning that they were in the temple selling the animals and the beasts, making profit for it. That's why he went into the temple and drove them out. It was angering him because of what they were doing, turning the house of the Lord into a house of merchandise. Matthew chapter 21, verse 12 and 13 says, "And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." So these merchants of this whorish woman, also sold slaves and souls of men. And this is seen during the time that the Jews were in exile. And what you find is actually after 70 AD, when Jerusalem was sacked, that they continued on in their merchandise trades throughout the Silk Road. And this continued on during the regions where the lost tribes were up in Afghanistan and in the areas of Persia and into India and into into the eastern portion of Afghanistan, which is actually western China, into those Silk Roads. And so what you end up finding is Radhanites. They're called the Radhanites. And they are the Radhanite Jews in the Silk Road. And according to Wikipedia here, it says Radhanites primarily carried commodities that combined small bulk and high demand, including spices, perfumes, jewelry, silk. And they were also described as transporting oils, incense, steel weapons, furs, and slaves. And so we know that the Jewish slave trade continued, and this is why it talks about the Jewish trade of slaves in the book of Revelation chapter 18, verse 13, where it says, "In the slaves and souls of men." We see that in Revelation chapter 18, verse 13. And this is exactly what they were doing. They were continued on in the slave trade, in the merchant trade of the slaves. And these are the merchants that were made rich by Jerusalem's costliness. Revelation chapter 18, verse 15 and 16 continues on. It says, "The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls." And these merchants are the great traders of the earth. Revelation chapter 18, verse 23 says, "And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be no more heard at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." So when the trade schemes come to an end with the sacking of Jerusalem, the global trade will come crashing down. And this is a part of the prophecy when Jerusalem is sacked, and then the people will not buy their product anymore. They will boycott Jewish products, and they will not deal with the Jewish trade merchants any longer after the economy crashes from their usury system that they had set up. And this is why ultimately the mark of the beast is introduced. And everybody will rejoice in heaven when this occurs. Revelation chapter 18, verse 20 says, "Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her." So Jerusalem, the whore that was made rich by these Jewish merchants and merchandising of Jerusalem and the temple, are what is talked about here on who is made rich by her. It's the Jews. The Jews who are made rich by the merchant trade. They've profited off of Jerusalem for thousands of years, turning it into a den of thieves. And this occurs in the last days until the Lord sends in the Antichrist and the kings of the earth to sack Jerusalem and to bring it down. And in that, the Lord will rejoice, and those people in heaven will rejoice because the punishment has come upon them for what they have done. And this is the prophecy of made rich by her.